Hey guys, welcome. This is Morgan Vale. This is my second podcast episode. I'm super excited. I don't know if you can see that I have a Christmas tree in the background. We try to be festive in here because we cover some dark stories. We have a lot to cover today. So before we do, I just want to let you know a special announcement. I'm now on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok. On Spotify, you can find me under Shadecore with Morgan Vale. And my first episode that I released last week covers the David case involving the young girl, 14-year-old victim, Celeste Rivas Hernandez, who was found in the trunk of his Tesla. And I know that a lot more has come to light since I've covered it, but I just wanted to let you know if you wanted to catch up, that's a good place to go. I also covered Anna Kepner's case on the 18-year-old cheerleader that was found dead on the cruise ship. So I know that a lot has surfaced on both cases, and I will definitely be following those two cases. But for today, I am going to cover Virginia Giuffre, and she posthumously published this book, which I have my hands on and I finished, Nobody's Girl. I'm not gonna lie, it was super hard to read. It was very hard to read. I'm also just nervous to cover this case because she has been through so much, and there's so much in this book alone. She names a lot of famous people that are associated to Epstein, and there's a lot of court cases and depositions, defamation cases that she mentions. So there's a lot of information packed into this book. For those of you who don't know who Virginia Roberts Giuffre was, Virginia Giuffre was one of the most prominent and outspoken witnesses who testified against the late Jeffrey Epstein, who unalived himself in 2019, and his co-conspirator, scum of the earth, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was a British socialite. Ghislaine Maxwell is currently serving 20 years sentence in prison for trafficking, where she belongs. So good, but not long enough if you ask me of a sentence. At the time, Virginia Giuffre was working as a locker room attendant at the spa at Mar-a-Lago, which is a very luxurious clubhouse that has a golf course, a recreation and sports center, and it's owned by Donald Trump. So her dad was working for Donald Trump as a maintenance guy and got her a job there as well, which is where Ghislaine Maxwell would eventually scout her out in 2000 and lead her to none other than the pedophile and the late Jeffrey Epstein. Virginia Giuffre is also well known for this picture. If you're looking at my YouTube channel, it is a very famous picture now that has swept the world's newspaper articles and court documents and has been blasted across national headlines. And it is a picture of her at the age of 17 when this photo was taken. And she's standing next to Prince Andrew, and he has his arms around her waist, and she has his arms on his back. And standing behind them is none other than the person who orchestrated it all, Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator in his trafficking ring. The photo, she said, was taken by Epstein in March of 2001, and it's so sad and infuriating because when you look at this photo, I think anyone can easily say that Virginia looks like she could be the daughter of these two adults standing next to her, but they are not her parents. They are her predators. This picture has just circulated everywhere. It was a very strong piece of evidence when she sued Jeffrey Epstein and when she sued Prince Andrew. So that's another thing that Virginia Giuffre has been known for, is not only publicly speaking up about Epstein, but also publicly speaking up about Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew has been in the news a lot lately and in the last 6 years because Virginia Giuffre was publicly suing him. He famously sued him in 2021, and he continues to adamantly deny everything. But since then, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, has lost his title, which is good, right? I wish more was being done. As of October 2025, when the memoir was released, King Charles III removed Prince Andrew of his remaining titles, Prince and Duke of York. Like, whoop-de-doo, we no longer refer to you as Prince. And he's no longer serving Queen Elizabeth II. He also got evicted from his royal lodge, his 30-room lodge. He had to get moved to Sandringham, which is a house estate property in Norfolk. Looks kind of like the property in the movie Saltburn, if you've seen that movie. And King Charles III is footing his bill for the rent. So just real entitlement, real privilege. There was also an undisclosed amount of settlement money given to Virginia Giuffre, rightly so. It's not supposed to be a disclosed amount, but rumor has it that the Queen footed about $16 million to Virginia Giuffre in the settlement. All of this seems like a slap on the wrist and just screams privilege, entitlement, and really not a good look for the royal family with all the recent scandals they've already been through. And he's given a few interviews, such as the infamous one that he gave on BBC, which is pretty ridiculous. I mean, check out this clip. He just sounds like a bumbling fool to me. So this is an interview with Emily Maitlis from BBC, and she keeps catching him in these nonsensical answers. He keeps saying, well, I didn't know Jeffrey Epstein that well. We knew each other through Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, hello, Ghislaine Maxwell is serving a 20-year sentence in Texas for being convicted for sex trafficking. So that's not a good look. And he just keeps denying how close he was to Jeffrey Epstein, yet he's been staying at his house. He's been on his private jet. The couple, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, were at every event that the prince invited them to. So nothing's really adding up. And then he even says at one point that he would have been able to spot trafficking, which is disgusting.
Remember that it was his girlfriend that was the key element in this. He was the, as it were, plus one to some extent in that aspect.
Am I right in thinking you threw a birthday party for Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, at Sandringham?
No, it was a shooting weekend.
A shooting weekend?
Just a straightforward shooting weekend.
But during these times that he was a guest at Windsor Castle at Sandringham, the shooting weekend,
Yep.
we now know that he was and had been procuring young girls for sex trafficking.
We now know that. At the time, there was no indication to me or anybody else that that was what he was doing. And certainly, when I saw him either in the United States, when I saw him in the United States, or when I was staying in his houses in the United States, there was no indication, absolutely no indication. And if there was, you have to remember that at the time, I was patron of the NSPCC's Full Stop campaign, so I was close up with what was going on in those time about getting rid of abuse to children. So I knew what the things were to look for, but I never saw them.
So you would have made that connection because you stayed with him, you were a visitor, a guest on many occasions at his homes, and nothing struck you as suspicious?
Nothing.
And let me just pause there and quote you a quote from Virginia Giuffre's memoir on page 356. Don't be fooled by those in Epstein's circle who say they didn't know what Epstein was doing. Anyone who spent any significant amount of time with Epstein saw him touching girls in a way you wouldn't want a creepy old man touching your daughter. Even the men who didn't partake of the favors Epstein offered could see the naked photos on his walls and the naked girls on his island or by his swimming pool. So,
Whole time.
Nothing.
Just for the record, you've been on his private plane.
Yes.
You've been to stay on his private island.
Yes.
You've stayed at his home in Palm Beach.
Yes.
You've visited Ghislaine Maxwell's house in Belgravia in London.
Yes.
So in 2006, in May, an arrest warrant was issued for Epstein for sexual assault of a minor.
Yes.
In July, he was invited to Windsor Castle to your daughter, Princess Beatrice's 18th birthday. Why would you do that?
Because I was asking Ghislaine.
So we're aware that Prince Andrew is very close to Ghislaine Maxwell, and even he himself will admit that. And remember, in Virginia Giuffre's memoir, she mentions that Ghislaine Maxwell is the one that really pushes trafficking her to Prince Andrew, which happened on 3 separate occasions. The first time that Virginia Giuffre mentions meeting the prince was when she was only 17 years old. On March 10th, 2001, a giddy, excited Ghislaine Maxwell, who orchestrated the meeting, told Virginia Giuffre that she would be meeting an old friend of hers and it ended up being Prince Andrew of the royal family, the Duke of York, sometimes referred to as the Queen's favorite son, as well as the royal family's party boy. Back then, at least. Now he's not so much, he doesn't really capture those titles so much. When Virginia Giuffre met Prince Andrew, she was only 17 years old, and he was 41 years old at the time. And apparently Maxwell had him guess Virginia's age, and he was spot on. He guessed 17 and then added, "My daughters are the same age as you," before proceeding to have sex with Virginia Giuffre, which is disgusting. It's just so gross that you can say you have two daughters that are the same age and then proceed to, let's face it, rape a child. A month later, at Epstein's townhouse in New York, Maxwell this time brought two girls to accompany Prince Andrew, including Virginia, as well as a second girl named Johanna Schoberg. The third time was on Little St. Jeff's Island, a private island owned by Jeffrey Epstein in the Virgin Islands, where Virginia Giuffre had to participate in an orgy, and she recalls that there were approximately 8 other girls who all looked like they were minors. Since these accusations were made, Prince Andrew has publicly denied these claims over and over again. He has reached a settlement with Giuffre with an amount that can't be disclosed. Prince Andrew's former girlfriend and socialite, Lady Victoria Harvey, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I learned about her. She's mentioned in this book and towards the end as somebody that just spoke nasty of Virginia Giuffre, victim blaming her for what happened to her and calling her a liar and a complete whore. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word. But even in Virginia Giuffre's death, she publicly typed the word karma. She also said in a statement on, I think it was TikTok, it was on Instagram, "When lies catch up to you, there's nowhere to go." So just a nasty woman, and it's like, what is benefiting you? And she also says so many contradicting things. Take a look.
And the comments that you made about that, you said, "When lies catch up with you, there's no way out."
So that's Lady Victoria Hervey for you. And this was an interview that took place 6 months ago. In Virginia Giuffre's memoir, she also mentions Lady Victoria just being nasty in interviews towards her. And I also want to fast forward a bit in one of the interviews because this interview is so wild. She's saying that this picture is not real, even though photographers have vetted for it. She's saying that she has phone recordings of Virginia Giuffre admitting to a lie that has not been released to the public, that haven't been released to the public since this interview was given, that Prince Andrew didn't do anything to Virginia Giuffre. She's saying that that photo is fake of Virginia Giuffre with Prince Andrew. Just ridiculous. And she even quotes Wikipedia to use as a source to dispute Virginia Giuffre's height. Like, somebody explained to this woman that Wikipedia is not used in debates.
She was 5'7". She's actually 5'3" on Wikipedia. The fact is, which I don't know if I even mentioned that last week, but we have phone recordings of a conversation. I have hours of tape, which the FBI has, which I'm waiting for Pam Bondi and Kash Patel to release, of Virginia Giuffre in phone recordings saying nothing happened with Andrew.
To who?
To this guy, George and Maria Farmer.
Why don't you put that out there?
So just absurd interviews that she's given. And if it makes you feel any better, the people in the comment section are not saying the nicest things. They're not thrilled about these comments that Lady Victoria, former party girl, former girlfriend of Prince Andrew, is saying. And I will happily read you some of their comments in this YouTube interview. Great argument for the abolition of class privilege in the UK right here. Somebody else wrote, 12 days later, no tapes, how utterly unsurprising. Someone else said, what a waste of private education. She can't string a sentence together, let alone form a coherent argument for any of her claims. And it gets worse. She says worse things.
Part of your argument is this woman is very traumatized, has had a really tough life.
She basically was saved from Jeffrey Epstein, to be honest. Like, her life was so bad. I don't think he was the catalyst that made it worse. Like, he actually put her into rehab.
Everything she's saying is kind of ironic because she's also given public interviews complaining about Ghislaine Maxwell using her as bait to get other women to pretty much be recruited. So that's royalty for you. Wow. So I went off on a long tangent there that's like 15 minutes, and a lot of it was talking about scumbags who do a lot of victim blaming and denying. But back to our star, the story, the hero of it all, Virginia Giuffre. And reading about her childhood was so heartbreaking because are there times when you look back at your childhood and you wish that you could have been the adult that you needed and told the other adults in your life that were being messed up to go and F themselves and F off, basically? Well, many times reading this book, I felt that way. Reading about what she went through as a child, I wish that I could have been the adult that came by and identified all the abuse that she was going through and said, look, it's not you, it's the people around you. They are bad influences and they are all using you. I want to do right by her, so I'm going to do Virginia Giuffre's story in 2 segments, and this is going to be part 1, just so you know. So I'm only going to cover her time leading up to the days when she met Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and I'm going to pause and continue the rest next week, just to give you an idea. Virginia has been described as a fierce warrior in the fight against sexual abuse and sex trafficking. She was the light that lifted so many survivors. Despite all the adversity she faced in her life, she shone so bright, she will be missed beyond measure. So Virginia Lee Roberts, who would later come to be known as Virginia Giuffre, was born in Sacramento on August 9th, 1983, to her father, Sky Roberts, and her mother, Lynn. She had 2 brothers, an older brother, Danny, who was from a previous marriage of her mother, Lynn's, so he was technically her half-brother. After Virginia's parents met and got married, they had her, who would be the middle child. Then they had her younger brother, who she nicknamed Skydie. So in total, the Roberts families had 3 children. The oldest was Danny, Virginia's half-brother. Then there was Virginia, and then Skydie. Her father, Sky Roberts, was a handyman and maintenance guy. In his younger years, he was lean and tall with auburn hair, born and raised in Sacramento, the capital of California. Virginia's mother, Lynn, who was from Richmond, Virginia, was a free spirit, born in the 60s, and during her teenage years, Lynn would butt heads with their own mother, Shelley, who was Virginia's maternal grandmother. Shelley was a tennis pro and one of the few tennis pros in the nation at the time. At the age of 16 years old, Lynn, Virginia's mom, ended up hitchhiking from Richmond, Virginia to San Francisco, California, and became captivated by the culture and scene around Haight-Ashbury, identifying herself as a hippie. She ended up getting married to a guy named Craig, with whom she birthed a child named Danny, who would eventually be Virginia's half-brother. After Virginia's mom, Lynn, divorced her first husband, Craig, she shortly after met Sky Roberts while in Sacramento. The two began dating. Sky would treat Danny as his own son, even though Danny had a different biological father, Craig. And Sky, showing that he liked kids and even wanted to raise more kids, won Lynn's heart. They were drawn to each other. The two became serious as a couple, and shortly after they got married. They'd later have Virginia and then Skydie, in addition to raising Danny together. As a young girl, Virginia loved animals. Virginia was nicknamed by her family as Jenna, and she loved horses. By the age of 3, her uncle picked her up and placed her on a horse. And a few years later, she would have a horse of her own named Alice, and she began riding horses. As Virginia's family grew, they relocated from Sacramento, California to the southern part of Florida to live with Lynn's mother, Shelley, in West Palm, Florida. Moving to Florida, well, it would shape Virginia's life forever for a number of reasons, not to mention that this would be where she would later have the unfortunate encounter of meeting Ghislaine Maxwell in Florida. Ghislaine Maxwell would later introduce her to the scum of the earth, Jeffrey Epstein, but we will get there. So Virginia and her family relocated from Sacramento to West Palm, Florida to stay with her maternal grandmother, Shelley, for a short while. But Shelley was super hard-headed and hard to live with for Virginia's parents. So Virginia and her family relocated from Sacramento to West Palm, Florida to stay with her maternal grandmother, Shelley, for a short while before they were able to purchase their own 3-bedroom ranch house in Loxahatchee, Florida. Loxahatchee is located about 30 minutes from West Palm Beach. And I've never been to Florida, but what I read paints West Palm as a very wealthy hub for millionaires and billionaires. And this year in 2025, it's currently ranked as one of the top 5 fastest growing wealth hubs in the world. And compared to Loxahatchee, It's a world of a difference. In Virginia's book, she describes Loxahatchee as this equestrian countryside. She loved riding horses. Around the time Virginia was 5, her brother Skydie was then born in 1989. Virginia adored Skydie, and she was a doting older sister to him, helping her mother raise him. With her dad working in construction to support everybody, her family didn't have much money. She recalled that she envied her classmates whose parents gave them money for school lunches, while her own father spent his earnings irrationally on things like booze, his construction projects, or automobile projects. Virginia's life may have looked like a childhood that was normal on the outside, even though her family wasn't wealthy. She loved the neighborhood she lived in, and she felt pretty close to her family. She loved her brother Skydie, and she was absolutely inseparable with her horse Alice. But things are not always as they seem, and things in Virginia's life began to take a very drastic and dark turn. With a third child in addition to the family, Skydie, Virginia's mom Lynn, would put the boys to sleep around the time her dad would give her bed baths, and that's how the parents decided to split the tasks caretaking the children. But these bed baths with her dad were the perfect opportunity for him to prey on Virginia, his own daughter, and abuse her. He started out by saying that he needed to wipe her whole body clean, and he would actually fondle her. He'd be touching her inappropriately, and she was only a child. She didn't know what was going on, which is just heartbreaking, and it clearly changed her life forever. Then things escalated. Her father would start inserting his fingers inside of her, and shortly after, he began to manipulate her further into giving him oral sex. Disgusting. And it's just heartbreaking. I can't even imagine what it's like for your earliest memories of childhood to be ripped away into this abusive, horrifying routine of a nightmare. And nonetheless, it's your own father doing this to you. And she mentions in her book dreading when she was a kid because her dad would sneak into her bedroom at night, and if she didn't obey what he wanted her to do, he'd threaten her by saying things like that he would take her horse Alice away. So just horrible scum of the earth dad. If things couldn't get any worse, her relationship with her mom at this time started to shift, and her mom started to spank her. She was no longer the loving mother that Virginia once knew. Her mom Lynn began to drink more. She began punishing her more and beating her and referring to her as a poorly behaved child. And there's one part in the book where Virginia says it was something along the lines of, "I was a poorly behaved child. I just wish she asked me why." So her mom was very avoidant about what was going on. It's just sick and sad because her father eventually started to sexually abuse her when her mom wasn't around the house during the daytime. And in her memoir, she mentions getting UTIs that were so severe that she couldn't hold her urine anymore. And at one point, her mother took her to a doctor who had mentioned to Virginia's mom, Lynn, that her daughter had broken her hymen. And her mom just shut the conversation up saying, "Oh, she rides horses," without even thinking to ask. It's not normal for a kid to be getting urinary tract infections, especially if she's peeing herself like that. And those are all just textbook signs of abuse. In my opinion, even the doctor should have said, "Hey, is there a chance of sexual abuse happening? You know, don't just chalk it up to horseback riding." But her dad wasn't the only one abusing her. To make matters worse, her dad, Sky, began inviting another family he had met, belonging to a man he had befriended named Forrest, a man who they referred to as Uncle Forrest, which just makes the story that much sicker. And Forrest had a wife and a stepdaughter whose name was Sheila. And it would later be learned that Sheila's mom would later on eventually divorce Forrest for sexually abusing her daughter, Sheila. And Sheila and Virginia later on in life actually talked about this and shared their experience because they were both being abused by their dads. But what was worse was that Virginia would eventually be abused by Forrest, and she would lose her virginity to Forrest. So she would lose her virginity to rape. So it's just gets worse. It wasn't long after quote unquote Forrest, Uncle Forrest, began molesting Virginia, and then he soon started penetrating Virginia. And this was all happening at what Forrest and her own dad called these backward sleepovers. And for some reason, you know you're a piece of shit, and your friend is probably a piece of shit, and you're probably comparing notes. At least that's what Virginia Giuffre later said that she suspected. But it's like birds of a feather flock together. Why are you letting you're already abusing your daughter. Why are you going to let your friend abuse your daughter on top of it? Moreover, do more damage than you did to your daughter. So it's just sick. It's just all bad. And around the time Virginia was 11, like still very much a child, her mom, Lynn, got a phone call from Sheila's mom informing her that Forrest was sexually abusing Sheila. But instead of looking to her own daughter for potential signs that Virginia may have been getting abused by Forrest, because Virginia was, having sleepovers with Forrest and her dad, her mom, Lynn, kind of just continued to play this avoidant role. And instead of leaving Sky, the dad, she sent Virginia away to live with her paternal aunt, Carol, who was Sky's sister, biological sister, in Salinas, California. So she sent her daughter away to another state, and Carol, who is sisters with scummy ass Sky, as you can imagine, she sucks too. And what would you expect? You would hope that maybe there's a good person in the family, but there really wasn't in the Roberts family that could stick up and take accountability for what was happening to Virginia. So she gets sent to live with her aunt. Her aunt sucks too. For example, Virginia's family is sending money and allowance for Virginia through Carol, and her aunt Carol is just using it for her own personal goods. And to make matters worse, the school system that Virginia went to in Salinas, California, it was gang ridden. It was run by kids that were in gangs. They wanted to jump her. They wanted to initiate her. And if you know gangs, a lot of them initiate by jumping the girl or doing gang banging. So she ran away from Salinas too, and she ran to San Francisco, and shortly after she was sent home. She said the winter in San Francisco was colder than she expected, and she eventually ended up finding her way back to where all the abuse started in Loxahatchee, Florida. Sadly, when she came back, her horse Alice was sold. So her family just sucks. And as you can imagine, Virginia was very traumatized, and her later years as a preteen and a teenager just kept getting worse. Obviously, she was going to rebel against everything that happened to her. And what pisses me off so much, so much of the story pisses me off, but her dad has the audacity to invite Forrest over, the one who's been abusing her during her childhood. And Forrest at this time had apparently become a devout Christian, go figure, and he pushes Virginia to the ground and demands that she ask God for forgiveness for what she did with him and her dad, which is so infuriating because, hello, you literally raped and traumatized a child. Now you're claiming you found God, but you're not even going to be held accountable for what you did and the damage you did. And it's already bad enough that he waltzed back into her life and her dad allowed it. But now this, and it's already giving the impression that her father and Forrest knew about their sick activities all along, because her dad allowed Forrest to come. So naturally, she started really rebelling and having reckless sex. At age 13, she started showing one of the neighborhood boys, Tony Figueroa, everything she had learned from her own father and from Forrest. And she started falling in with the wrong crowd. You can't blame her. She's reenacting a lot of things that she was shown. And there was literally no adult. Every adult failed her. Every adult didn't take accountability. And eventually, her mom sent her to live at Growing Pains, which is another piece of shit program that I'll get into. But I'm going to be honest, a part of me was really disappointed to learn that this was part of her story. And I had to really question myself on why that is. Obviously, it's disappointing because no child should go through this. I was disappointed in the sense that oftentimes we don't want victims caught in scandals as big as this Epstein case. We don't want them to already have a past. And I realize that that's really jaded perspective because we don't want our victims to be blamed for what happened to them. We want our victims to come from a clean slate. We want it to be this one-time thing that we could have avoided, and we don't want their past to discredit them. It's as though if they have a past of abuse, such as Virginia did, then for some reason, it's easier for people to have ammunition to launch a smear campaign against these outspoken victims if they have a past of being abused before they met their current perpetrator.
And to my case in point, just remember the interview with Lady Victoria Hervey and that messed up interview she gave about how Jeffrey Epstein pretty much saved Virginia Giuffre. She does exactly that. She uses Virginia's past to discredit her, and that is not right.
So this book is so important because it really addresses the cycle of abuse and how the abused are more vulnerable to becoming victims to manipulation, as Virginia Giuffre did. She's literally running from her own troubled family where she's being abused. It paints a picture of why she's desperate, why she's vulnerable, and why all these other victims were vulnerable because they possibly came from troubled past and abuse and had nowhere else to go. There's a quote from Virginia's book, Nobody's Girl, on page 77 that really stung and stuck with me. It reads, "So many young women, myself included, have been criticized for returning to Epstein's lair even after we knew what he wanted from us. How can you complain about being abused, some have asked, when you could so easily have stayed away? If you didn't like feeling dirty, you could simply have never gone back. But that stance wrongly discounts what many of us had been through before we encountered Epstein, as well as how good he was at spotting girls whose wounds made them vulnerable to him. Several of us had been molested or raped as children. Many of us were poor or even homeless." And I think this quote really breaks down why some people are just so much more vulnerable to becoming victims than others. And also, he was good. Him and Ghislaine Maxwell were good at preying on girls and spotting these girls who were broken. And she talks about that a lot in her book. Virginia was eventually sent away by her own mother to Growing Together, a tough love treatment center in Lake Worth, Florida, located south of West Palm Beach for troubled teens, one that she recounted running away from on several occasions. So once again, she's running away from this treatment center. She really would rather be anywhere else on the streets than in this treatment center. And that really paints a picture of how bad this place is. For instance, they promoted healing for troubled kids and offered group therapy sessions, but it was a very cruel and rigid program where the children who were between the ages of 13 and 17 would be forced to do things like stand in front of a mirror and call themselves failures. The girls would apparently shout, "I'm a whore, I'm a slut," and the kids were pitted against each other. There were also special cells known as the White Room, where the teenagers, if they stepped out of line for whatever reason, would find themselves locked in. And it was a room with no toilet, no mattress. You'd have to sleep on the floor. It was dirty from the previous people that had been in the isolation room. Pretty much like a prison, if you ask me. So, like, what was keeping you from running away at this point, really? And the facilitators at Growing Together seemed that they could just care less about the children in the program. But some of them even appear to enjoy humiliating and harassing the kids and pinning them against each other. Another thing that's really messed up about Growing Together is that all the kids were required to keep a journal and journal at night, and the counselors would read it, which is already messed up in my opinion. But on top of that, some of these counselors would read what Virginia wrote about being sexually abused, and they didn't say anything. They didn't offer to get her counseling or encourage her to go to the police. They literally did nothing. So although it encouraged Virginia's love for writing, she continued to be more vulnerable to being a trafficking victim because of this program Growing Together, which she would run away from. She became more susceptible to violence, as the book shows. A few times Virginia hitchhiked when she escaped from juvenile hall or growing pains. Apparently she was in both. When she was 15 years old, she was picked up by a white van, and then the driver, who was in his later 30s, as she described, took her to a motel saying that they had to make a quick stop, but then the man held a gun to her mouth, attacking her, choking her, and at gunpoint he raped her. At this point, Virginia was convinced she would be murdered, but to her surprise, he got a phone call, which he had to take. He stepped outside and threatened to kill her if she left, but once he was out of earshot, she made a run for it. And I'm so glad that she did, because who knows what would have happened if not. But she just ended up going from one abuser to the next, because shortly after that, she was on the curb crying when a limo pulled up, and the limo belonged to none other than Ron Eppinger. And you might be thinking who Ron Eppinger is. He actually knew who Epstein was. It's like all these scum of the earth know each other. But this would be the first trafficker that she would meet in her lifetime. I mean, in a way, her dad was kind of a trafficker, like letting her spend time with Forrest. It was just disgusting. So she's on the curb crying after being assaulted, and it's the perfect opportunity for another piece of shit to come along. So this time it was a man named Ron Eppinger. He was 63 years old, heavyset and balding. Real charming, right? He claimed to run a modeling agency called Perfect 10, and next to him in his limo were several foreign girls who also looked much younger. So at first, Ron Eppinger came off fatherly, caring. He took her shopping, told her what to wear, and shortly after, he started to sexually assault her. This was in 1998. As it turns out, the modeling agency Ron Eppinger owned was in fact a $1,000 a night escort service, and federal prosecutors would later prove that Eppinger and two Czech associates were trafficking young girls overseas to South Florida to work between the years 1997 and 1999. So Virginia met him right before 1999, at the end of his crazy reign. Eppinger was at first gentle and then soon began to show his violent streak, demanding sex and abusing Virginia. Virginia began to acquire drugs like Xanax and oxycodone from the other girls to dissociate from all the pain that she was feeling. And after 6 months of being abused by Eppinger, she was just given to his friend, like an item. And his friend was a club owner in Fort Lauderdale's night scene who supposedly owned a club called Hot Chocolates. And his friend was not shy about the fact that he basically had a minor under his thumb who he bragged about as his girlfriend to everybody around him. So it was no surprise when the FBI came and raided the place. But out of fear, Virginia was interrogated and didn't say anything because she's aware that Ron Eppinger is a powerful man. They have her dad pick her up, and back she goes to Rackley Road on Loxahatchee. So Virginia found her way back to the source of her abuse once again. Her father, Sky Roberts, ended up picking her up from the police station. And when she went back home, her relationship with her mother and dad just remained shitty. Her family made it clear that she wasn't very welcome, and her mom was still very avoidant about what may have been happening outside the house. So just very infuriating when a parent doesn't take accountability and try to get their kid help. Her mom disregarded any attempt at reconciling or addressing what might have happened or trying to get help for Virginia. So she spent a lot of time running away from home again, couch surfing between places, such as some of the places of the friends she'd befriended at growing together. She eventually moved in with a boy named Michael out of convenience because she knew that
He liked her.
and it was better than living at home for her. And at this point, she had learned how to use her appearance to get what she wanted because it was literally all she knew and was taught how to do during her life, her short life. Then one day in 2000, when Virginia was about 16, going on 17, her father, Sky, who got a job working as a maintenance guy at the Mar-a-Lago, was able to get his daughter a job. And this to her seemed like a huge opportunity to finally change the trajectory of her life. For those of you who don't know, the Mar-a-Lago is a private luxury club that includes private suites, a golf course, spas, sports and recreation center. Only the wealthy hang out there. And I read that the annual membership fee just to like sit there and order food is something like $20,000 annually. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more. And the Mar-a-Lago is owned by Donald Trump. And I don't know if any of you have been hearing about the Mar-a-Lago face. I'd be curious to hear more about what that is. But apparently it's like some appearance that people are requesting from plastic surgeons to give them the Mar-a-Lago face look. Just something random. Anyway, I digress. So her dad, Sky Roberts, got her a job as a locker room attendant at the spa. And she was working for $9 an hour. That's crazy, right? Because like for how much money the Mar-a-Lago has, they're only paying her $9 an hour, but I'm not surprised. She even met Donald Trump, who she mentions meeting in her book. And Donald Trump offered to find her work as a nanny because he knows a lot of wealthy parents who need babysitters within his circle. But before any of that could happen, Virginia ended up meeting none other than the British socialite and scum of the earth, heiress, drumroll please, Ghislaine Maxwell. And the way she met Ghislaine Maxwell was super disturbing too, because it just paints a picture of what a predator Ghislaine Maxwell is. And she just uses her gender and her status to kind of put the spell over young girls who are mystified by her because she's got expensive purses. She looks so well dressed and poised, and she's got her British accent. She must look so sophisticated waltzing around a place like the Mar-a-Lago and catching the attention of these desperate girls who she's actually scouting out as a recruiter for Jeffrey Epstein. So it would be in 2000 that, unbeknownst to Virginia, she was being followed by a car, and inside the car was none other than Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's evil accomplice, and her private driver, Juan Alessi, who went by John. And when Virginia was working at the reception desk, she was reading a book. At the time, she was starting to think more about what she wanted to do with her life, and she was interested in becoming a massage therapist. So she was reading a book about anatomy. She was finally in a new environment, safe. She wasn't around Ron Eppinger. She had some freedom from her family, and she had some way to make money. So she was at her job kind of skimming an anatomy book when Ghislaine Maxwell pops up and impresses her. She described Ghislaine Maxwell as having a purse that probably cost more than her dad's truck, which probably was true. I wouldn't be surprised. And Ghislaine automatically strikes up conversation with her. She's charming. She's all the things that, a young girl, somebody like Virginia, who had such a hard life, might look up to someone like Ghislaine. And even in the book, she says, I, at the time, was hoping that I could be like her one day, just from looking at her. Ghislaine began chatting with Virginia about a man she knew who was looking for a private masseuse, but she started out by saying, oh, are you interested in massage? You like anatomy? Something along those lines. And Ghislaine mentions that she knows a very wealthy man who is looking for a private masseuse and offers Virginia a job. And Virginia, of course, jumps at the opportunity, and her dad doesn't question it. So next thing you know, her dad is driving her to her first shift at Jeffrey Epstein's West Palm mansion on El Brio Way. And this place is famous for being one of the pedophile hotspots that Jeffrey Epstein would abuse his victims at and also offer other people to abuse his victims at. So I'm not going to go into dates and the depositions, although I'd like to next week. It's not next week, but I'm just going to end here. And I know you might be thinking, what? But I wanted to more talk about Nobody's Girl, the beginning of Virginia Roberts Giuffre's life, and why she was so susceptible to being preyed upon by traffickers. I'd like to end with the reminder that Virginia took her life by suicide and was found on the ranch in Perth, Australia. And she had been estranged from her husband, Robbie, for a while. And he had actually gotten custody of the kids and sought a restraining order from her. And there's a lot of speculation about her death now. Her brother, Sky Roberts, says he was the one that found her dead body. But there are also people saying that she may not have taken her own life and this was not what she would have wanted. She doesn't have a will, and she leaves behind 3 children. I might talk more about that. Let me know in the comment section if that's something you're interested in hearing more about. And I'd like to end with a quote. She says on page 356, some people think Epstein was an anomaly, an outlier, and those people are wrong. While the sheer number of victims Epstein preyed upon may put him in a class by himself, he was no outlier. The way he viewed women and girls as playthings to be used and discarded is not uncommon among certain powerful men who believe that they are above the law, and many of those men are still going about their daily lives enjoying the benefits of their power. So Virginia Giuffre named a lot of people, including Bill Richardson, the late former governor of New Mexico and U.S. ambassador, Marvin Minsky, the late AI pioneer and MIT professor, Glenn Dubin, a hedge fund manager, the French modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, Hyatt hotel chief Thomas Pritzker, and a former U.S. senator named George J. Mitchell, as well as law professor and one of Epstein's own former lawyers, Alan Dershowitz. And of course, she named Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew. But there were a lot of high-profile people who are not named that Virginia Giuffre admits to being afraid of naming in Nobody's Girl, her memoir, including a heralded statesman, a gubernatorial candidate, a former U.S. senator other than Mitchell, as well as 2 billionaires without providing full names in her book, as well as a well-known prime minister. And she straight up says she's afraid of naming them. So there is still a lot of work to do. And that is all I have for today. So thank you so much for listening, and I will have part 2 ready for you next week.